Okay, good morning. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana on a Saturday morning. And today's topic is one we like to talk about all the time. So last week we did a class on what is the proper soil, the fact that the soils that are being made, which are primarily ground up plant material, just aren't very sustainable for very long. If they work at all, they'll work for maybe a few months, and then as the particles start rotting away, the plant starts to deteriorate, and that's one of the problems we have, and then the roots rot, and we're blamed for overwatering. So we'll be talking about everything but that. Now, last week we did mention that, I didn't show my rock though, is that proper soil, which looks more like this. This is from a local farm whose farmer claims this is the best soil he's ever farmed in. It's pretty much sand, and if you grind up a piece of granite, the white flecks in the granite are quartz, which become the sand and the silt, and the darker specks in the granite are clay, or I forgot the term they used, and they become the clay of the soil, which makes it hold more water. The sand and silt help the soil breathe, and that's good soil. It's pretty much quartz. Same thing as glass. If you melt this, you get glass. So that's what soil is. It's not ground up dead trees. No matter how much people try to convince you that dead trees make good soil, nature, trees don't grind themselves up. So now we also mentioned that we have our own brand of soil. Now, if I sold bags of this, that'd be perfect, except no one could lift them. So soil itself, 100 pounds per cubic foot or even more. The soil we make is still mostly quartz with some peat moss in it, and that's our top pod and our acid mix. So the soils we make for our customers can work, but generally if you use natural soil, now sandy loam, which I just showed you, is the soil found by riverbeds. Decomposed granite is halfway kind of between this rock and the sandy loam, because in this case the riverbed hasn't ground this down into finer particles. But still, there are many farms, little inland in Southern California, that are on decomposed granite. And this works just fine. So enough about soil. So we did mention with watering, now it's really hard to tell how wet the ground is by looking at it, and there really isn't anything, there is no such thing as overwatering, especially if you're on a farm. If you've got decent soil, soil that drains pretty well, as this sandy soil does, there is no such thing as overwatering. There never was. Last year when we had ample snowfall and record rains, and this year too, the farmers last year were told, flood your fields. Orchards are flooding the fields. It didn't hurt the trees. The water just kept going down into the ground. The water had plenty of oxygen in it. The soil, they wanted to replenish the groundwater in the farms, and so they just turned on the sprinklers and turned them off. They had plenty of water up there last year, and most of it's going to the ocean, so they might as well just soak the farms up there and let it percolate in. Now, generally, when you water the ground, you want to water, if you want a production plant, the key is to keep the entire root system wet. Well, last week we did mention that most plant roots grow down about a foot, maybe a foot and a half in the best soils. So you want to maintain that soil moisture down to that depth for a production plant. Now, if it's just an ornamental plant, pine tree or just a shrub that doesn't do anything, you can let it dry out quite a bit. Those plants will just shut down their systems and stay alive. But if you have a production garden, fruit trees, vegetables, flowers, you have to maintain moisture throughout the root system. And again, for most plants, it's about a foot deep. Well, how you tell? Don't use moisture meters unless you have a real sophisticated one that operates not the way most moisture meters operate, because most moisture meters will tell you it's wet until the plant is bone dry and dead. Too dry. So the way farmers used to measure moisture, and some still do, is with a rod. Could be wood, could be fiberglass. This is a rebar shaped for that purpose. And they wanted to see how far they can push it in the ground where they irrigate, where they normally irrigate, how far they can push it down by hand. If the soil is moist, they can push it in. So if it was moist a foot deep, they can push this in a foot deep. So most farms would like to keep the penetration level between 1 foot and 1.5 feet. And if they could push this stick in right where they were irrigating, 1 to 1.5 foot deep, they were on target, and they would just maintain their moisture at that level. The goal nowadays in agriculture is to keep the soil moisture as even as you can. Now, 100 years ago, we didn't have the technology, and farmers essentially flooded their fields once a week. Even up to a few years ago, I knew a farmer that still did that. But when you flood a field once a week, it's really wet for 2 or 3 days, and then it's fine, and then it gets real dry toward the end of that period. So the moisture level is going up and down, and then back up and back down. So all the latest research we're getting from agriculture is that the more frequently you water, the better the plants are. Instead of letting it dry out between watering, like some academia or some experts claim you're supposed to do with plants, they're saying just keep it wet. Just maintain that moisture in the ground a foot and a half deep. Just keep it there. So we just got a new article from research down in Brazil where they were watering their farms with little sprinklers every 2 days for 2 hours. And then they wanted to see what happened if they did 3 times a day for 20 minutes each, which is the same exact amount of water, but applied much more frequently. And they said all the results were positive. They had better crops, the plants looked better. We know of some farms in the Central Valley who they claim water 18 times a day. They said if it's above 80 degrees, the computers will check the moisture in the ground. They'll water for a few moments in the next hour just to compensate for that. They want to keep the moisture ground as even as they can. And they said they actually save 30% on the water bill, no loss in crop. So that's state-of-the-art in watering. Water more frequently. I mean, they did the other test too where they watered an orchard. It was an almond orchard with the same system, micro sprinklers underneath the trees. On one orchard, they watered it every day lightly. And on the other side, they applied the same amount of water, but once a week. And they wanted to see what that did to the trees' root systems. And when they dug the trees up at the end of the year, they found that the trees that were watered daily had a bigger, deeper root system than ones that were watered weekly. Totally opposite of what they thought they would see. They thought that, I mean, when you think about it, you think, well, if you only water once a week and it dries out, those roots are going to search for that water. Well, they didn't. They actually had the better root system on the side that was watered every day. So everything we were told about irrigation is wrong. So the key now is, top off the tank, keep the soil moist. I mean, Oregon, they say with the apple crops, they want to maintain the moisture level in the ground 5 foot deep. They said the apples really need that extra moisture reserve in the ground. Now, they get enough rain up there to get the ground that wet, and they just have to maintain it all summer long. So in fact, what the farms in California have been told, so in the old days, what they would do is, you know, it would rain in the winter and the ground would be wet real deep, and then they wouldn't start watering until the ground dried up. Now they're saying, no, as soon as we get warm weather, start irrigating. Don't let the groundwater reserves dry up on your plants. They don't really like that. They'd rather stay moist at all times, down deep too. And they said it was only one irrigation extra that they would have to do that, and their plants responded a lot better. So if you have your soil done properly and you buy plants that are in the right soil, then again, there's no such thing as overwatering. Now, how much water do plants use? Well, again, you can measure it with the stick. Now, the problem we have in our homes is that different plants use water at different rates. If you're on a farm, every plant's the same. You know, you can just check one plant and you can check the whole orchard or the whole vineyard. But in your home, everything's different. If you have a 100-foot eucalyptus tree down the street, you know, within, say, 2 houses of your house, the roots are in your yard. And that thing is sucking, you know, in the summertime, maybe 100 gallons a day. I mean, we know a 15-foot tree, an average 15-foot tree, if the weather's 90 degrees and the humidity's around, say, 30%, you're talking 50 gallons of water in one day in a longer day like June. So that's how much water trees use. And one of the big problems we have in vegetable gardens, you know, you put your vegetables in the ground, and if there's any big trees within a few houses of your yard, you have to water those trees along with your vegetables. That's what makes it hard. So that's one reason we would say, you know, normally we don't like to till the ground. We're not supposed to turn the soil over because it messes up the ecosystem soil, but that's one of the best ways to tear up the tree roots that are in your yard is to rototill it. Now I asked a farmer, because he had these 100-foot windbreak trees around his farm, what do you do about the roots on those trees? He says what we do is every 5 years we run a trencher between those trees and the rest of his farm. You got to cut those roots off, get them out of his crop, because they're stealing water like crazy. So it's hard to, you know, then the edge of your farm would be suffering, even though you're watering it all the same. And that's the same thing happens in your yard. Last house I lived at, the Greenbelt Association put up these pine trees that within 10 years, they were like 80 foot tall.
If you have a tree that's been around for 20 years, the roots keep growing no matter how much you, different kind of about the, what do you call it?
Canopy?
The canopy. That doesn't,
well, they say, okay, so the size of the root system on most trees, they say, is 3 to 20 times wider than the tree is tall. So a big range there. I mean, 3 to 20 times wide, but that's what they found. And trees, their goal is to try to grow a bigger root system as possible. We'll talk about that a little later too, but to stay healthy, they have to keep growing longer and longer roots. I mean, my first house I purchased, there was a tree there that was 20 years in the ground, and it was about 30 foot tall, and it was getting to my sewer pipe, so we had it removed. And then I took the roots out of the ground because, you know, the trunk of the tree was this big and the roots were like this. I followed the roots about 30 feet to my front door of my house, and then they didn't go underneath the slab of the house. Tree roots generally don't go underneath the slab of the house. There's no oxygen down there. But it followed the slab all the way to my back door. I'm going, this tree had 100 foot of roots in 20 years. It was just crazy. It just went all the way around my house. Busted up all the lines that the homeowner put in because he had put them in, 8 inches deep. Roots on plants don't go but much below a foot. So the standard, and you know, if you're a contractor, you're told you got to put the pipes in 18 inches deep below the root system of the plants, or else you're in trouble when the roots start growing. And this guy had put all his pipes in about 8 inches deep, so the roots are just totally breaking those pipes up. So anyway, I had to fix that. So water-wise, yeah, so water frequently. Now, the bad thing about watering frequently is that you get a lot of weeds. That's why we do recommend covering the ground with some kind of mulch or some kind of mulch layer on top of the ground so the weeds can't get started. If you have mulch about 2 or 3 inches deep over your ground, then the weeds don't get started as easily. But if you water all the time, then the weed seed tends to grow real well too. If you have a drip irrigation system, you get fewer weeds. Drip irrigation is nice that way. It's real accurate, but the problem with drip after 5, even a couple years, is all the parts start breaking. And then you have to go find what breaks. And then when you go on vacation, you go, okay, hopefully this doesn't break while I'm on vacation. So that's, so sprinklers aren't much less accurate than drip when the yard is mature, because once the yard is mature, an ornamental yard is mature, then the roots are all over the garden. So no matter where you're watering it, the plants do get the water. Now, the one thing we caution about watering is you can cause diseases if the leaves of the plants have water sitting on them still for 4 hours plus. So we'd rather see water in the morning on a quote sunny day when the water will evaporate off those leaves quickly. If you water, say 6 and 7 or 8 in the evening and the water sits there on the leaf not evaporated until noon the next day, then they can catch diseases. That usually happens more, when it's raining and the air is super humid for long periods of time, the water droplets. So diseases start in water droplets that don't move. So when you're irrigating something, you're not causing disease unless the water then, after you finish irrigating, clings to that leaf for at least 4 hours without evaporating. So do watch that. So we try to keep plants dry at night if possible, to keep the diseases down to a minimum. And water doesn't burn leaves. I mean, we still have people swearing that they water their plant leaves at noon and the leaves burn because water cools the leaf off. It doesn't burn it. It's just that burning on a leaf happens in the same area where the water might collect. If it's a big wide leaf, you have a drop in the middle of the leaf, that's the same area of the leaf that tends to sunburn because the edges cool off easier than the center of the leaf does. So
Drinks the water from the leaf, right?
they probably could. Yeah. Well, plant leaves are supposed to be waterproof with that wax layer on them, the stomata underneath. The water can escape when they're bringing the carbon dioxide. I don't know if I should talk about this, but plants nowadays get by with less water than they did 50 years ago. So what's happened is that our CO2 in the atmosphere, well, it was, I think they said when they first started measuring it around 1920 or so, it was around 200 parts per million. And now it's 400 parts per million because of all the stuff we burn, the gasoline and all that. So plants evolve when the CO2 levels, most of the plants we grow evolve when the CO2 levels were about 700 parts per million, 800 parts per million. In the old days, prehistoric days, some of the modern plants evolved when it was lower, like grasses, corn can get by with less carbon dioxide, but they said most plants would stop growing and die and stop reproducing if the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere drops to about 125 parts per million. And it was gradually headed that direction. So the fact that we're burning more carbon dioxide, they said the plants are loving it. So plants nowadays grow way faster than they did 50 years ago, and they said they don't need as much water because what they do is they open the stomata on the bottom of their leaves to let the carbon dioxide in because they need the carbon dioxide. They use that, they combine that with water, CO2 and H2O make sugar, C6H12O6, and oxygen. That's the byproduct is oxygen. So they don't like to leave their stomata open too long. And now that the carbon dioxide levels are double, they don't. They don't lose as much water when they're operating. So NASA scientists have to admit that the Earth is a lot greener now than it was 50 years ago because the deserts are greening up again. The plants don't need as much water as they used to. So
urban areas would grow better crops. LA.
Well, the CO2 gets pushed all around the globe. So. Yeah, it does. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of farmers, especially the marijuana growers, who are inside buildings. They will raise the CO2 levels tremendously to get those things to grow a lot faster. Now, just so you know, humans can't take it above, so we start to suffer if it gets much above 10,000 parts per million. So we're ways off from there, but that's, when Apollo 13 had the problems, they got above 10,000 parts per million and they were starting to suffer very heavily. So that's the danger point. 10,000 parts per million is when we start to suffocate. But right now we're at 400 parts per million, which is 0.04%. Just so you know how much that means. That's 0.04% of we're 20% oxygen, 0.04% carbon dioxide, which to plants is wonderful. Okay, so anything questions about water?
So that it's not down in the soil and being affected by freeze.
Well, the roots will find their way in. So yeah, if you have a raised bed, line it with weed block, which keeps the roots out. So that really helps. Or till the ground, even though that's not good for the soil. Till the ground and get the roots out of there. Or you can, if you have a lot of money, you make your beds and then you trench around them and drop concrete or root barriers into the ground around this bed. That's the other way to do it is, roots don't go much below a foot. So if you put a 18-inch deep root barrier in there, they make some up to 2 foot deep. Just make a trench, drop them in there. The tree roots will have a hard time getting into your bed. You don't find roots much below a foot. I've dug out trees, trunks this big, no roots below that deep. There's no such thing as a taproot. That occurs a lot in deep containers, but not in, well, that's not true. If you have soil that's super sandy and the air can get down 2 or 3 foot deep, the roots will go down there. I mean, it's interesting, 50 years ago, we had one bare root supplier, I think it was Howard's of Hemet, that was out in Hemet area, and the soil there was so sandy, they would send us bare root roses with roots that went straight down. So you get one root on this rose that's going straight down. They couldn't get it out because it went down so deep. So that operation failed after a while because they couldn't get any reasonable roots on their plants. Most bare root plants are now grown southern Central Valley where it's more clay, keeps the root system closer to the surface where they can dig it out easier. So interesting note there. So yeah. Okay, so nutrition-wise, I gave this little sheet of paper has a list of all the minerals that plants are made out of. And the top 3 we don't think about because they're in air and water, and that's carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. So that's in water and air. Carbon, of course, and carbon dioxide. And so what plants make out of it is sugar. C6H12O6 is sugar. And then what they make from that is the primary body of a plant. So the wood of a plant, is cellulose, which is just a sugar molecule that's modified with those same minerals so that we can't digest it. The only things known to digest cellulose are, I guess, fungi and bacteria can eat cellulose. Bacteria is the primary thing that animals use. So if there's any animal that's like, we can eat plants, but we can't digest the cellulose. So we have to get it from other parts of the plant. But termites, beavers, cows, their stomach can digest cellulose because they've got bacteria in there that do that process. Change the cellulose back into sugar, and then they can consume the sugar. We can't do that. I mean, if we can do that, they can eat wood. But we can't do that. Now, you know, cows have two stomachs, one that has the bacteria that changes it into the sugar, and then the other stomach consumes the sugar. Beavers, you wouldn't want to be a beaver. Beavers have to consume their wood twice. So the first time it passes through the system, it changes the cellulose into sugar, and then they have to eat their poop and get the sugar out of the wood. So not pleasant. So anyway, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Fourth most important mineral is nitrogen, which makes up the cell membranes of all the cells. So on us, our skin membrane, all of our membranes are made out of nitrogen. The hair, nitrogen. So plants have cell walls, which are cellulose, but they also have cell membranes, which are nitrogen. So if you need to grow something on a plant, you need that nitrogen. Fourth most important is potassium. Potassium doesn't have any specific role, but it is the salt that balances the fluids of a plant. And it is the same salt that balances our blood flow, and our interstitial fluids that are not in the blood. We have to have the potassium in there. That also helps keeps our nervous system healthy. Potassium also makes fruits juicier. So it is the juice of the plant is balanced by a salt called potassium. That's its only role, is to make the plant juicier. And then you have phosphorus. Now, a lot of people tell you, that phosphorus makes better roots and better flowers and better fruit. No, it's the lack of nitrogen that actually. So if you don't, phosphorus is a energy transfer molecule. So without phosphorus, you cannot make energy, you can't store energy. So it's an important part of the plant. It doesn't really, quote, make roots or make flowers, but if you have too much nitrogen in the system, then you're growing so fast that you may not be able to store the energy for fruits and flowers. So what the growers do is they just back off on the nitrogen and keep on doing the phosphorus and potassium, but back off on the nitrogen. And that's the reason they say, well, feed them phosphorus instead of nitrogen. Well, you don't need to feed them the phosphorus. They don't need much. You just have to back off on the nitrogen to get them to store energy. So be aware, too, that fertilizer is not an energy source. Now, when we eat stuff, that's our energy source. You feed a plant fertilizer, no, you're not feeding it energy at all. You're actually taking it away. Their energy is sunlight. The fertilizer is building materials. So be aware of that. If you're fertilizing a plant, it's not making it stronger. It's just growing, but it's not making it stronger. Their energy source is their sugar that they create from sunlight, and the sugar storage they have in their system is their energy. So if you have a plant on its deathbed, don't keep throwing a lot of fertilizer at it. Doesn't help it out that much. The last major nutrient is calcium, primarily in trees. Calcium is a part of wood, so a lot of old trees have a lot of calcium in them. and it also helps. It's involved in finishing the fruit of a plant. So if you're lacking calcium in tomatoes, you get that brown end on it because it can't finish it properly. So these are the more of the major nutrients that plants need. Of course, by far they need carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, and then these are also needed. And then all the other minerals that plants need are in small amounts, and they're micronutrients. So there's magnesium, sulfur, iron, chlorine, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, molybdenum, nickel, and cobalt. And most of these are needed in small amounts. I mean, still need billions of molecules of them in a plant, but in relatively small amounts as enzymes or parts of, the chlorophyll molecule has a lot of these minerals in it. So the chlorophyll, which makes the plant look green, if you're missing some of these, the plant doesn't look so green because that chlorophyll molecule is not being made. So you do need a lot of these to finish off that chlorophyll molecule that turns the plant green. But these are needed in very small amounts. So typical plant, 45% carbon, 45% oxygen, 6% hydrogen, 1.5% nitrogen, 1% potassium, 0.2% phosphorus, 0.5% calcium. You notice calcium's higher than phosphorus. And then for the rest of them, it's 0.2, 0.1, 0.01, 0.01, 0.005, 0.002, 0.002, 0.0006, 0.0000. So these things are really, even those are even smaller, so you don't need much of those. One orchard cured its zinc deficiencies by just hammering a galvanized nail in the trunk of each tree. So
So the first four are gases, right? And the rest of them are all minerals.
well, carbon can be a piece of charcoal. So, well, the plant gets it as a gas. But pure carbon is, diamond's pure carbon. And the ratio between this, and this tend to be something around 6:4, the NPK, 7:14, somewhere around those ratios. Now, the other problem we have is that people that are not quite into everything, a lot of people are asking us for a balanced fertilizer like 15, 15, 15. Well, that's not the ratio in a plant. 15, 15, 15, very high numbers. It sounds good because all the numbers are the same, I guess. That's why they think it's balanced, so it's better. The plants aren't balanced that way. They're like 6:4. And the problem when you have too much phosphorus in the ground, especially if it's chemical phosphorus, so 15, 15, 15 is a chemical fertilizer. The organics, say if it's 555, real high phosphorus, are all balanced numbers like this, that doesn't hurt a plant as much because it's natural forms of phosphorus, which are not that dangerous. But if you get a chemical that's 15, 15, 15, high phosphorus tends to mess up the ecosystem of the ground because it's never usually found in a soluble state. it's usually locked up in some kind of organic matter, and the only way the plants get it is through that mycorrhizal fungus breaking down the organic matter and getting it to the plants. If you give it free phosphorus and you give too much of it, you start sterilizing the soil, killing off the natural ecosystem of the soil, and then you're totally dependent on chemicals from that point on. So don't use too much chemical fertilizers. The other thing to know about fertilizer is that a lot of these micronutrients, the minerals, the soil stores minerals pretty well. The soil does not store nitrogen well at all. So the main number we need, the nitrogen, is very mobile in our ecosystem. So there's no soil that has much nitrogen in it at all. Phosphorus and potassium don't move much in the ground. They're not, if you put phosphorus on the ground, it just sits there. And in Orange County soils, our local soils, the main thing we don't have to apply in the ground is phosphorus. They said it's double the amount that most plants need. So we don't have to apply a fertilizer with phosphorus in the ground. In pots, yes, you'd have to do it. Potassium is low, it's there, but you do have to apply some potassium too if you're starting out fresh. And the nitrogen, you always have to make sure your plants have a source of that, because nitrogen either evaporates as ammonia or leaches too far into the ground as nitrates. Yes.
If you have like grass clippings and make a tea out of that, would that be nitrogen?
Yeah, you don't have to make a tea. You just throw the grass clippings on the ground. That's your source of nitrogen. So in nature, in our natural ecosystems, the minerals, there's not many minerals in the ground. There's not a whole lot in the ground, especially if you've had, well, let's say a climax ecosystem like a forest. If they go in a forest and measure what's minerals in the ground, they basically find nothing. It's all on the plants. Those huge trees have all the minerals in them, and it's on the ground in dead leaves. So you have all these leaves covering the ground. So the tree took the minerals out of the ground and put them in itself. When the leaves fall on the ground, the minerals are in the dead leaves, and these are recycled, and that's where the nutrients are held. They're in the dead leaves. So dead leaves are nature's source of nutrition. The University of California, Davis went around the Central Valley, and they wanted to see how the different soils around the Central Valley affected plant life. They said, no effect. Apparently, it didn't matter if the soil was sand, clay, silt, whether it was high in this mineral or low in that mineral. They said the same plants grew. They just recycled the dead leaves. They said wherever dead leaves are piled up, the same plants grew. They said that in their opinion, the plants were not getting anything out of the dirt. They were just recycling the minerals from the dead leaves.
The dead leaves are fertilizer?
Yes. Well, most of these organic fertilizers are something that died. So, and animals and plants, animals are made out of that list of minerals I had there. They're only missing one. Animals only missing one. I don't recall which one it is. So animals 16 minerals, plants 17, perhaps 18. And most of these fertilizers are either, like this says, fish bones, cow bones, corn gluten meal, alfalfa meal, feather meal, kelp meal, kelp flour, just ground up dead plants and animals. Yes.
I have a compost bin. I've learned that dried out, like leaves, anything dry or dead is considered carbon, and like green is nitrogen, and that's how it gets the compost pile to get hot by mixing the two. So you were talking about dried leaves with it. I guess that's a nutrient too. So
Yeah, the leaves have a lot of nitrogen in them. I mean, not as much as manure, animal manure, stuff like that, but they've got a lot of nitrogen in them. So leaves are generally considered, the green stuff is more nitrogen, and the brown stuff, which is wood and bark, would be more of the just carbon, less nitrogen in that. So still nitrogen in there, but it's less. So, and now last week we talked about how nature recycles. Most of the recycling is done by a fungus in the ground, and the fungus is not friends with the bacteria in the compost pile. If you just throw dead leaves on the ground, nature will recycle that faster than they will if you put them in a compost pile first and then put them in your garden. Of course, composting makes things look a little better just because it makes it turn dark, but in nature, most recycling is done, just leaf falls to the ground, it's decomposed by a fungus.
Okay, we have chicken. The chicken food have all of this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we need to start mixing that into our compost.
Yeah, a lot of farms who have chickens say they don't have to buy fertilizer. And in fact, chicken birds poop out almost pure chemical. So it works really fast. Okay, so now the other thing about farming is that, they've got to change, or they're starting to change. The new generation of farmers are starting to change how they operate because, we leased land from an organic farm here in Orange County for 4 years. And what they do is, they prepare their land, put in, the irrigation system, and then they plant the crops. And then after each crop is done, they tear out the irrigation system, put in a new irrigation system, tear out all the plastic they put on the ground between the crops, and then they take all the crops to the landfill. There goes all your fertilizer, and then they have to buy fertilizer and then refertilize it. So they're wasting a lot of the fertilizer that nature creates in plants. So the new farmers are being told, don't throw away your crop. You harvest your crop, take all the chaff, just the leaves and stems, the stuff that you can't sell, and you compost them, or you shred them and put them back out in the field. So a lot of the new farmers are learning how to do that. The old farms never operated that way. So they're telling the new farmers, yeah, you got to figure out a way to save this stuff so you don't have to spend so much money buying fertilizer. So now, some of the documentaries are real negative about farmers, but they just didn't know any better. Now, a lot of the new farmers are going back to what the old farmers just did. So they, according to, I don't know if these statistics, how true they are, they said most of the crops in the United States are grown to feed pigs, cows, and chickens. Not to feed humans. They're being grown to feed pigs, cows, and chickens, to make milk, eggs, butter, all that stuff, meat. And they said we can just avoid that by doing what the farmers used to do, is just grow your animals on the land. Don't put them in a feedlot and then have to grow corn to send to the feedlot. Just grow them on the land where they're intended to be. And then, like they say, cows are really good with the land. They eat it. They pound down the weeds with their hooves, so they manage the land that way. Bison apparently did that in our central states for eons. They tended their own land. They pooped on it. They kept the weeds down. They said, yeah. So there are farms that have gone back to that. One farmer in Texas had a documentary about him. He says, I couldn't afford to grow crops anymore. I couldn't buy the seeds. I couldn't buy the fertilizers. We just started growing cow. And at the last moment, we just started growing beef cattle on it. And now we're fine. We just leave them out. We just manage the field. We put them on this area of the property, and we put them over in this area of property for a while. We move them over here, move them over there. We don't have to buy anything anymore. We just sell cows. we're making it again instead of trying to grow crops to feed them. So that's that. Now, you know, all this stuff, how do you do it in your yard? How do you do it? I mean, chickens, perhaps. And if you have a big enough property, maybe goats. But that's the hard part of having a whole ecosystem in your yard. I mean, it's been, you know, it's been starting to do it all around the world. So there was this book out there, what's it called? I can't remember now. Something about the last straw or something. This farmer, this son of a farmer who went off to college to be a botanist, went back to his dad's farm because he wanted to see what he can do with his dad's farm. And instead of doing all the things that they were doing, where you have to throw all the stuff away, he decided, well, let's see if we can just operate without throwing anything away. And so this is back in the 50s. So they were growing rice. And normally after you grow rice, you have to take all the chaff. You can either burn it or, well, they were just throwing it away. So what they started doing is after they harvest rice, they would just lay the chaff on the ground and plant the barley seeds in among the rice chaff and grow the barley, and the nutrients from the rice would grow the barley crop. And then when the barley crop was done, then they would grow rice again. And they said minimal work. And they started doing that on the whole farm back then. And they had people come from all over the world checking out what they're doing because they weren't throwing stuff away anymore. Right. Or not buying much anyway. So that's the goal, is to, if you're growing corn, then you got to chop up the stems. And now we're still trying to figure out, with each crop how to do this. Now the last thing I'll talk about, and one of the last things I'll talk about too, is why farmers rotate crops. So anytime you grow a crop, well, okay, so how long plants live? So the bigger a plant can grow, the longer it can live, in general. So trees live the longest. And again, what their goal is to grow roots into virgin territory every year. The goal of any plant is to grow roots into virgin soil, because every year they grow roots and the roots die. And then they grow new roots and the roots die. Well, the new roots do not like living where the old roots are dead. So that poisons the soil around the plant. If the plant can't afford to get bigger, it dies younger. So perennials, a lot of perennials like dahlias and penstemon, 3 to 4 years is max, because they're only programmed to grow a certain height. And that certain height can only afford a root system so big. And after 3 or 4 years of growing in the same soil, they poison their own soil with their dead bodies, and they fail. They just fail. Now, if you want to keep a dahlia alive longer, all you do is you dig up the bulb, move it a couple feet, put it back in the ground, or you take it out of the ground and take that soil away and put virgin, fresh soil without dahlia roots back in the hole. And away you go. You can keep that thing going forever. Well, somewhere along the line, they'll pick up diseases, but for a long time, if you keep on renewing its soil. So, or just move it. So trees can live as long as they can grow a root system further away. And according to the ag department, or the forest department, they said trees, like pine trees, when their roots are healthy, they're shaped like this. And they keep on growing taller and taller and growing wider and wider roots. Eventually they come to a point where they cannot grow wider roots. And they said those trees, the shape starts rounding out at the top. They're reaching their maximum size when they round out at the top. And then when trees die because they can no longer maintain the root system, it's relatively fast. So like a redwood tree might be healthy for 3,000, 4,000 years, and then kind of slow down for another 1,000 years, and when they start dying, it's just maybe 50 to 100 years, they just die. They can't live in their own dead root system anymore. And then after they die, then no tree can live in that spot for another 20, 30 years. It takes quite a while for all that all that dead root system to be eaten up by the fungus and bacteria before the same tree can grow in that spot again. Now, in nature, there is a way around this. It's called a wildfire. So in the United States, in our temperate forests, there are dry spells, and when there's a hot wildfire, that heat is enough to sterilize the soil down about this far, which is enough to get a new crop of the same trees growing again. If you burn down a fir forest, you can get the fir trees to grow back. If it doesn't burn, they won't grow back. Something else is going to come in. So there were complaints about that back east in the Appalachians. They said, yeah, we're not letting these oak trees burn. The pines are now taking over. We got to let this thing burn down so that the oaks can return, not the pine. You know, they like oaks better than pine trees, I guess. So that's the thing. Now, if you're in the tropics, anywhere where there is a lot of rain all year, like in the Amazon, any jungles, there's no wildfires there. And what they say is the diversity in a rainforest is incredible. The average distance between the same tree is something like 70 yards. All the trees look alike, but they're not genetically the same because they can't live next to each other. Whereas in our temperate climate forests that burn down, you can just have a whole forest of the same tree. Now, farmers have to follow the same rules. So thousands of years ago, they found out that, now, you know, people have only been farming for what? Not that long. The Sumerians apparently started farming, how long ago was Sumerians? 10,000 years ago? Somewhere around there. But anyway, they discovered that if they didn't grow the same plant on the same plot of ground every year, if they rested the ground, then it would grow better after a few years of rest. They thought the ground had to rest. Crop was taking out something that it wasn't. That they finally found out, no, it's not that what they're taking out, it's what they're leaving behind. So just a few hundred years ago, they found out, oh, they just have to grow something different. Grow something different, that plant will be healthy. So it's got to be unrelated. So on this other sheet here, on the front of this sheet, we have on vegetables, the families of vegetables. So when you rotate crops, the main thing you have to do is change to a different family of vegetables. So if you have a vegetable bed, it's, you know, if you have the room in your yard, and it's nice to make at least 3 beds, 4 is better. For in each bed, you grow the same family of plants that year, and the next year you move it over to the next bed, next year you move it to the next bed, next year you move it to the next bed, and then you go back to the first bed. A friend of mine who runs one of the larger organic farms in Orange County, it's Orange County Produce, told me they're on a 10 crop rotation cycle, so they don't grow the same family of plants for 10 crops. And we leased land from for 4 years. We did not see them grow the same plant in the same plot during those 4 years. I mean, he told me, you know, that his cabbage crop doesn't make him any money at all. Sometimes they lose money. Same with, you know, certain other crops that they grow. The only crop that really makes a lot of money for them is strawberries. So they, you know, they do all this rotation, get back to strawberries. It makes them a fortune. So that's how organic farms operate. They keep rotating from soil, from plot to plot, to make sure that by the time they get back to this first plot and repeat, the remains of that plant have had time to dissipate and be gone. It doesn't take much. It just takes, you know, like if you kill a human being and grind up their body in little tiny parts and scatter it throughout your house, it may be only minute portions of dead human that are laying around your house, you're not healthy. It doesn't take much of that related plant to poison the ground for that plant. It doesn't take much. I mean, roots in the ground make up only 1% of the soil. That's that 1% of dead stuff can affect the next crop if it's related. So farmers rotate crops. Orchards have to rotate after the orchard gets old. They got to change to a different type of tree. We heard the Napa Valley won't let the farmers plant anything but grapes, so when the grapes get old, they have to leave the land, well, let the weeds grow for 10 years before they can grow grapes again. Now, there is something called square foot gardening. Where we have this four by 4 area. Each little thing is a foot wide, and they put a different plant in each one of these things and expect to do that year after year after year. Now, you can see if you don't rotate crops, and all these just have, they're not really divided, so the roots can grow anywhere they want. So you can see after a few years of that, you can't grow anything in there anymore. But what the square foot gardening people have done is they've modified their soil. So what they do is they make it really lightweight. So they use vermiculite, perlite, and compost, which hardly weigh anything. So that when they pull a plant out, most of the roots come out with it. They don't get cut off and left behind. So they had to modify this to make it work, because it ain't working that way. If you don't rotate your crops properly, you're going to have a mess. Well, better to have 4 raised beds so that you can just move the plant from bed to bed.
You better have the soil modified, otherwise there's not enough room to rotate.
True, or just divide those beds in two too. So you have some kind of rotation going. Because it's expensive to make lightweight soil. Perlite and vermiculite are not cheap items, so it's just easier to rotate or wall off the area so that you have 4 separate areas. Yes.
You're talking about kind of leaving the roots, or you're cutting off the plants, or you take out most of it, which is the out, which is the worries out.
Right, you don't have to worry about, you just, when you finish a crop here, ideally, you just take that crop and leave it right there. Let her decompose right there, get the nutrients back in the soil. Yeah, I mean, that's what we have to figure out how to do that. I mean, generally, if you have a chipper, you just chip up those, let them dry, chip them up, throw them back on there. So it's just like a mulch layer on the top. I mean, essentially, a lot of people use garden straw. Well, that's just a dead wheat. You can do the same with any plant. Dry it up, grind it up, put it back on. But, we don't know how to, we don't have the tools and all that knowledge to do that stuff yet, but that's the goal. I mean, once I chopped up corn plants and left them on the ground, and my wife threw them away. I mean, it does look kind of trashy if you don't do a good job that way, so. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is good to do, but this was grown in Canada, so how ecological is that? We don't have any local sources of wheat, apparently, or any local sources of wheat that are doing things organically and that we trust send it to us, so. Right. Right, you want to leave them in that same, if you grow something here, chop it up, leave it in there so that because all those dying leaves have disease associated with them, um, that'll affect that particular plant. So. True, I mean, if you have dead tomatoes in here and you're growing a new crop of tomatoes here, you don't want the dead tomatoes over there. So that would be, in theory, what we do. I mean, again, they're still working on this stuff. If you put it in a compost pile first, the heat of the compost pile will destroy all the diseases. So then you can put it in a different one. Right. But that's a lot more work to do that. But well, I mean, it's just got to get hot. I mean, not everybody does the compost pile properly where it heats up to 170. You know, it can get really hot in the compost pile. I mean, there was some smoke behind the mountains the other day, and I was thinking, when another compost pile just went up, that stuff can catch on fire. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's to destroy all diseases. So like Kellogg's, who's in Carson, California, where all the sewage goes to in LA, I've been to their facility and they have thermometers they have these huge rows of human waste mixed with ground-up wood and bark. And they have to see that temperature hit 170 to make sure, because that'll kill all the human diseases that are in that stuff. And then they can send it to the farms across California. So.
Put in like a backyard. I can get mine up to like 145 without any problem. That's, you can see my face. I don't put any like meat or anything like that. I just do organic stuff.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's probably hot enough. I mean, yeah, that's probably hot enough. Yeah, so doing all that in a small area. Let's see. There's one interesting thing that's done that we do, that people do, well, okay, so we do have chicken manure now, and in this garden compost bag of what is called garden compost, there is chicken manure in it. But chicken manure is now a lot cheaper than a lot of the, quote, other organic fertilizers. So we're tending to sell a lot more chicken now because the price of most of the packaged organic fertilizers has gone way up. Happened with the pandemic, combined with Ukraine supplying a lot of the world with fertilizer. Now there is one interesting thing that we always talk about, is that, so again, when you feed plants, you're not really making them stronger, but there's one way you can feed them that actually does make them stronger. So was an article 40 years ago that I read where people in Palos Verdes couldn't get their fruit trees to flower because it's so cloudy up there. They couldn't get enough energy on the plant. Couldn't store enough energy. So they found this formula in this university research thing, how to get energy into leaves of plants, because they were doing hardwood cuttings, and the cuttings didn't have enough carbohydrates to finish off the root system. So they found if they sprayed molasses on the cuttings, they absorbed them and finished the root system. So they took the same formula, molasses, fish emulsion, and seaweed extract. Molasses is the energy. Fish emulsion's the fertilizer, source of nitrogen. And then the seaweed extract is the growth hormone that kind of kicks plants or gets them growing. And it's 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce in a gallon of water. And you spray that on a plant, it makes it stronger, grow faster, make more fruit. So this is actually feeding a plant energy. So we tried it. I had a plum tree that was averaging maybe 5 plums per branch over the whole tree. We sprayed just one branch with that in the fall. That's when most fruit trees store energy for next spring's crop is in the fall. On that one branch had over 20 plums on it. We're going, okay, that seems to work. If you spray it during the spring or summer when the plants are programmed to grow, it makes them grow a lot faster with bigger leaves. And if you want to grow a world record pumpkin, this is one of the keys. You know, they say if they don't do this, they can't break 500 pounds. So they're actually cheating.
I did that with the foliage plant. It was so bright and colorful, and everything is just really a healthy plant.
Yeah.
So many little leaves, and just blossoming everywhere.
Yeah. It is kind of amazing what you can do. And I met someone from the Philippines says, oh, we always spray cane sugar on our mango trees to make the fruit sweeter. So people around the world do it. If you have a cheap source of sugar, then it can make things sweeter if you really want the extra sugar, or if you it makes plants make more produce. So, right, just any green part of the plant. I read an article saying that plants absorb sugar right through their leaf, not through the holes in the leaves, but right through the leaf.
I got one tree that it flowered like crazy. All the flowers fell off. Did something like that help it?
A bit. I mean, if it's blooming like crazy, that means it had the energy stored for the bloom. If it didn't hold them, now they, on different subject, but like navel oranges, they say the average crop is 1 fruit out of every 50 flowers.
Oh. One problem might be that it gets blocked from the afternoon sun. I don't know if there's that certain.
Yeah, but it had the flowers, so it had the energy to make the flowers. Now, the only thing, so the main thing that we can affect, that would affect the fruit set on any plant, would be water. If you don't have enough water in the ground, a lot of trees abort their crop. But that's the only thing we can do. I mean, fertilizer has really nothing to do with it because the plant's already stored the energy up. So just all you can do is water. Now, interesting story. There was a research project done on an orchard in Central California. They said it was missing so many minerals that the trees looked like ghost trees. These were citrus trees. They said the leaves were almost white. And they wanted to measure the crop it made. They said it made a full crop. These trees that look like they're in death's bed, well, they're just not death's bed, but they had plenty of leaves, but they just had no color in the leaves, and they couldn't believe that the crop that they were making was normal. So the looks of the plant don't have, you don't have to be 100% green to make decent crop. So, okay, couple other items I just brought by. So in organic gardens, one of the most important things to do that's not organic done is control the ants. So we have this product called Amdro. There's other products in the market that work like Amdro. It's cornmeal laced with a slow-acting poison. The ants carry this back to their nest, eat it for 3 days, and then they all die. But you got to keep those Argentine ants, those little black ants, and in fact, just about any ant out of your vegetable garden, because ants, their job in nature is to move the aphids and the mealybugs and the scale from the weeds to your good healthy plants where they can suck on them. The aphids and mealybugs excrete the excess sugar, which is the ants' food. So the ants treat these like dairy cows. And if you have ants in your garden, you've got sucking bugs in your garden. You don't want the ants there.
So that's okay to put on a raised bed or anything? It's not going to get.
Well, it's not systemic, but you don't have to even put it in your bed because this is a bait. The ants find it. You can put it in a little tray in your bed if you want. You can put it next door. You put it in the green belt. You put it on the sidewalk. The ants will find it, and it'll kill them. But yeah, it does work. So you need to get, like we did this in our yard. I mean, before this came out back around 2000, when we had those trails inside our house that wide, it was crazy. We're trying all kinds of things to get the ants out, and then we put this out there, and we put out like double this amount in our quarter-acre lot, and apparently we killed off the block colony because our neighbors told us we didn't see ants at all in the neighborhood for 15 years. So we must have got the big colony. So that really worked well. The other things we do in organic gardens, spinosad products, which is spinosad's a chemical that's found naturally in rum. And so the bacteria that makes spinosad also makes rum. And this chemical kills chewing bugs and thrips better than anything else we've ever had. Now, someday this stuff will become, insects will become immune if you use it long enough, but right now it works quite well. So caterpillars, green grasshoppers, beetles, pill bugs, and thrips. Not much kills them better than this. Not as well. We use a different product for them. So most of the produce that you're growing on the back of the little information sheets that say, wait 1 day to eat lettuce, 1 day to eat corn, 3 days to eat certain things. Tell you how soon you can eat after you do this. Most things it's 1 day. And since, most of us have drunk rum in our lifetimes, it's probably totally safe. The other things we use are oils. So oils can suffocate and kill slow-moving insects. So aphids, mealybugs, scale, things don't move fast that suck on plants. Whitefly. When you go after whitefly, go after them when the sun sets, because when the sun sets, they don't fly. And then they're sitting ducks. You hit them with an oil spray, and that just suffocates them, kills them, and the oil evaporates. There's mineral oil, and then there's essential oils, which are pantry oils. So rosemary, sesame, peppermint, thyme, cinnamon, and garlic. So the nice thing about this is that there's no EPA number on here. So like if we use something with the EPA number on it, we have to report it to the government. When we use something that doesn't, we don't have to tell them anything because they don't care. This is Dr. Earth Final Stop. Now, there are many products like it that have natural edible oils. Let's put it that way, edible oils in them. So the marijuana growers use stuff like this. Spinosad. Most pests and diseases can't last long on a leaf once it's dead. So yeah, you don't have to worry about that. They say most diseases, by the time the leaves naturally hit the ground, the disease is no longer viable. So, in fact, when it hits the ground, then all the bacteria and things that live in the dirt tend to eat the disease spores up. So they're destroyed by the soil. So the depth of the mulch you have on top of the ground, we read that some farms work with a foot, which is deep. A foot of mulch, so this farms that have row crops, they're saying they're using a foot of mulch on top of the ground. And then when they plant their plants, they have to move the mulch aside a little bit, plant the plant in the ground, then as the plant grows, they move the mulch back. But that way you'll stop all your weeds. You don't need to fertilize much, don't need to water as much either. So the other interesting thing we read or listened to seminars about is that a deep layer of mulch will also generate water. So there's interview with farmers up in the Pacific Northwest, and they said, yeah, we were wondering what was going on because our apple orchard up here, we have to water it every day in the summertime, but the forest next to us, no one ever waters that. And they would walk. They said they walked into the forest in the morning, and the dead foliage is piled up knee height. They said there, and it's just soggy. It's just soggy. The cool air passing, well, the moist air passing through the cool mulch, just the water just condenses out of it into the mulch. And they said that they started doing that in the 80s, so they would just call over the local tree trimmers, just have them dump loads and loads and loads of trimmings onto their farm. Into their orchard area, they would go 18 inches deep, row crops 12 inches deep, and they said they've never turned on the water ever since. Of course, it rains a lot more up there, and it's more humid near the coast of Washington than it is here, but certainly it'll help the garden to put mulch in that deep. Of course, they don't have to worry about forest fires as much up there. It is very flammable. It can be very, well, actually, if it's moist, it doesn't burn. There's a Santa Ana, watch out. Okay, I think I covered just about everything. Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between the garden compost and the chicken compost?
Chicken manure is, the only ingredient listed is chicken. And this is, it's an interesting product because we've never had another product where they actually listed green manure, or green waste is one of the materials in it. So this is wood products, rice hulls, green waste, chicken manure.
So that might be less expensive than like the top pot. If you like throw away dead.
Well, you can't grow plants in that. You can feed them.
Oh.
This is just
Yeah.
food.
Yeah.
Of course, again, you can make your own of this type of material too. And these this company that we get this from is not certified organic. It's really hard to find certified organic manures. Or at least around here. Okay. All right. Thank you.